This is Family Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Mike Ulmer for the first time. And you are a writer, and
Yeah,
you've been into business books. We're going to talk about that before,
yeah.
but we want to welcome you to the Family Electric Ghost podcast, and let
Thank
everybody
you.
know that also let our folks know that you can see that icon up there that says "Listen on Newsly." Now we are a podcast on that platform, and for our people who are watching or listening tonight, they can check that out with a coupon code of Ghost. Later tonight, we'll be on Newsly, and we are a featured podcast there. So you can check out an audio version of this interview there. And also to let people know, we're actually at episode 1037, tracking on Apple Podcast since
That's my,
2016. And
that's my
then we've
favorite
got
number.
your
What are we on?
website, MikeUlmer.com. That'll be fully clickable when we're
Thank
published.
you.
So
Oh, that's
people can click
fantastic.
through
Thank
and
you.
go right to that. And then the other thing we're going to talk about today, the topic that we've got on deck is the 3 pillars of every great business book. So before we get to that, maybe you want to introduce yourself to the audience and give it like a brief, like elevator pitch of your background, your story.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. My background is journalism. I did about 30 years of journalism, traveled the world, met all sorts of great athletes, loved it, loved it, loved it. Involved in the business world, and then realized that the people in the business world did not have any idea of their stories. I didn't know anything about business. It was like there was this kind of like there's this mall down below my feet that I didn't even know existed. And so I went to some networking meetings called BNI networking meetings, and I just found them to be great people. And I learned that there's this subset of people that are just living on their wits, right? They don't have the guarantees of a weekly paycheck. They don't have a building to walk into. They're just figuring it out on their own. And I think that's fantastic. So I started talking to all these business people. And again, I realized that they just have no grasp on their stories because I have a saying, the book you think you're going to write, if you write the book you thought you were going to write, you wrote the wrong book because it's just not the story you think it is. And yeah, it's fun. It's true. And so my specialty is helping people figure that one signature story, and then we can either blow it out into a book or just send them away for the rest of their days, telling the one story, as I like to say, they should tell every day for the rest of their life.
That's interesting because I'm a producer and songwriter as a
Yeah,
serious a side gig. And the
yeah,
one thing we do as songwriters is we tell stories. The songs that are successful are stories that
absolutely.
basically, and people own those stories once they hear them. But
Yeah. Oh, that's so true.
and a lot of times when we write those, we could say we had a big plan. But if you interview a lot of the great artists, they'll say that they kind of came from like a flow state, stream of consciousness, that they trusted themselves, they kind of believe in the muse. And a lot of times that's where the great work comes from. Is you could start to plan, and I've planned tons of songs, but the unplanned like moments that I capture on my multi-tracks that end up being better than anything I usually planned. And so that's just my kind of background, but I'm wondering what you
No,
think
no,
about
you know
that.
what? You're right. Paul McCartney woke up and he had the tune of Yesterday, and he was sure he nicked it from somebody because it was so clear in his mind, that he asked John, he asked George, he asked Ringo,
Yeah, they
and they
heard
said, no, man, he spent 2 days asking people. If you ask Bob Dylan, had this great quote saying that he just doesn't know where those early songs came from. He says they're a place away from where he is in terms of where his headspace was. He looks at me and he looks at it like somebody else had written them, and somebody else
yeah,
has. There's something
it's the
out there.
muse.
I tell people their story's already ready.
Yeah, I love the basement tapes. I was listening to like the 10-hour version,
Wow,
and
you're a fan. You're a
with the
fan.
band. Well, I just like the stream of consciousness nature of those songs because it
Yeah.
really talks about creativity, and people try to put a lot of a lot of stuff on it, like mask and layers, and try to be a little pompous about it. But that's the heart of song creation. Like listening to that with Robbie Robinson and the band, and Dylan and Big Pink in the basement doing that stuff. I'm like, that's like how you do it. Like every time I've been with people, from a jazz fusion band to a punk rock band to an electronic band,
Yeah.
like when you sit there and you just like the band just comes up with it,
Yeah.
that usually is what jives the band together. That's what makes the song, what makes the experience of why you want to do it in the first place.
It's so interesting, the process, because you mentioned Dylan. Here in Canada, we revere Leonard Cohen as one of the
Oh,
great
Leonard Cohen,
songwriters.
yeah. Oh,
And
he's
he's
awesome
so
too. Yeah,
good. He's
yeah,
so
yeah.
good. He and Dylan were talking one day. I don't know where they were. They were in a coffee shop somewhere, maybe in Greenwich Village. And then they were talking about the art of writing. And Leonard Cohen said that Bob Dylan said to Leonard Cohen, "How long did it take you to write Hallelujah?" I should do this backwards. But Leonard Cohen asked Bob Dylan how long it took him to write Blowing in the Wind or some classic. And Bob Dylan said, 15 minutes. It took Leonard Cohen 7 years to write Hallelujah. And he was lying. It actually took him 9.
No, well, sometimes it takes, like, if you had a progressive rock or a band, like, yes, they're layer and layer and layer and
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I like that, and but it's like a blues guy or like jazz fusion, listening to like anything that Coltrane was doing or Davis or Sun Ra. There's something about that in the moment, saying, "Oh, there's no bad notes," and letting it be, I've talked to a lot of writers that kind of go through this thing. Well, I can storyboard something out and I can outline it out, but sometimes it's that interview. If you're talking to people for like nonfiction books or that real life experience that is beyond anything you could like try to sketch out or script out.
Well, there's sort of 2 ways of looking at it. And from what I understand, there's sort of the European and the North American way. And the North American way, and you nailed it when you said storyboard, build up. And the European way is that the sculpture is already in the stone, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a matter of getting the superfluous stuff out of there. And that's my view. It's not, and I try to tell people, it's already there. Don't be afraid that you have to create it. It's already there. You're just unearthing it. And that's a
Yeah.
different headspace.
Yeah, it's totally different because I lived in Japan for 2 years.
Wow.
And what I loved about Japanese is like when I was living in Tokyo downtown near Roppongi, and I just was just amazed by the ancient nature of Japan. There's like these like gardens and stuff where there's like these temples, and you could go and just do Tai Chi, and then you have all this modern stuff, and there's this dichotomy of like the old Shinto temple and then the modern skyscrapers and all the modern stuff that's all there at the same time. And then, being on the train and watching salarymen reading manga, like, wow, they don't think that's like a kid thing. They're into that art. They're into this graphic art as like a commercial thing that's not just for kids. And I was like, wow, that's a different mindset. It's a different way of experiencing things.
Yeah, I agree.
But in terms of writing a business book, because that's like the topic, like there's 3 pillars, and maybe you could talk about, because a lot of times people are like, well, business is like, there's a music business, there's an art business, either businesses for, people or creative people, they're in business. But then you're probably talking about traditional business or maybe not. So maybe you can talk about like the 3 pillars of business and what type of business those the pillars are geared toward.
Sure. So I think every book is a business book. And that's a little contentious. People tell me that I'm wrong, but I think there's just 2 types of people. Those who want to write a book to help their business, and those that want to make writing books their business, right? And so that's the gig. So every book, no matter how autobiographical, what's the great line about his, Charles Barkley said he was misquoted in his own autobiography. But it could be, even if it's an autobiography, there's elements of that resonate in any book. And it's just so, even autobiography to me is business book. So here's this 3 elements. There has to be a proposition. There has to be this killer proposition. Like the 4-hour work week. What a brilliant proposition. Who wouldn't love a book called The 4-Hour Work Week or 10,000 Hours, which is a great book about time management, like sort of going, you're going to die, and then let's move it backwards, right? 4-Hour Work Week, if you've read it, it's just a really smart book about managing your time, maybe remote work, that sort of thing. And so it's really, the ideas are simple and commonplace, but it's wrapped in this great idea, this proposition that's so powerful. So one of my favorite examples of this is a book written by Annie Duke, and it's called Quit. So let me ask you this, Phantom. If you're at your summit, you're a summiteer, and you're sitting at the base of the mountain, you're looking up at that mountain. What's your goal?
I want to climb a mountain, you would think. or get to the point.
Your goal is to get back, dude. That's your goal, is to get back,
To get
right?
back to
And
survive
so
the
when
mountain.
people, these mountains are
Yeah,
littered with people who forgot what their goal was, or thought the goal was just going to the top of the mountain because they ignored all the benchmarks when they should go back, and they died.
mm,
So her
yeah,
point is, you should know when to go back. You should quitting is something we sort of discourage, and wrongly, because quitting and pivoting, whether it be a bad relationship or a job that you can do better in, or settling, you shouldn't settle. We make that mistake all the time because we believe in the old make it work until it works, work until it's right, and sometimes
yeah.
it's just never going to be right, man. And so what happens is we should quit. And so the name of the book, Annie Duke wrote a book called Quit. Now, that's a great proposition, right? What's quit, when you should quit? Great idea. No one has ever had a book called Quit. No one's ever had a book called The 4-Hour Work Week. No one has ever had a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People, written in 1938. So this is a great idea. But so you've got the idea, the proposition. So the proposition, when you're walking by the airport and you see this thing on a book cover, it should swing your head over. That's when you know you've got a good proposition. Someone should say, what the hell? So it should be counterintuitive, but it has to have great value for the person that's reading it. They have to rightly believe, that it can change their life. That's a proposition. Now, let's go back to Annie Duke for a second. Her book is called Quit, as you know. Now, she was a professional poker player. Who would know more about quitting, when to quit, than a professional poker player?
Yeah.
She's the ideal person. And because she's the ideal person, right, she has credibility because her backstory is perfect. She was a professional poker player.
Makes sense. Yeah. Yeah.
But all our backstories lead us to this conclusion. So you have to share the backstory, right? And that's the good and the bad, the stuff that's hard, the stuff that you're encouraged by, the times you felt low, the times you felt high, the great things, the lousy things. That's everything that leads you to that conclusion. The person who's reading this book needs to know that you walked the miles, right? So you have your great proposition, you have your great backstory, and then you have advice drawn from all this knowledge that you have. Because you've got people, they're believing in you. You've got them all the way, and then you're not going to tell them nothing? You have to give them tons and tons and tons of great usable advice that they can use right away, tips and hacks and everything. And those are the 3 pillars. So a great proposition, a terrific backstory, and lots of advice.
That makes sense. I mean, you're keeping it simple, because sometimes people come up with 10 bullet points, but
Yeah.
I always been a believer in keeping it simple.
Yeah.
And also, like,
10 bullet points.
yeah, well, because if you think about, like, if you're a songwriter and you layer stuff, right, you could layer something and have 64 tracks of layers.
Yeah, that's like Queen. Yeah.
That's cool, but sometimes, like, it's being more sparse, it draws attention to the tracks that are there, and then it becomes more meaningful in some situations where, like, you allow that space and you allow the impact of the note. If you have so many layers, you can't really feel the impact of all the notes. Maybe subconsciously you might, but you're not really feeling the impact. So having something that's to the point and keep it simple, I think is a way to get the clutter out or the noise out, because a
More
lot of people don't know where to start. Like, so it's very intimidating. They're trying to climb the peak instead of trying to come back, or knowing the full picture of what they want to do, and they get lost in all the steps. And it's like, well, I can't do it because, oh, I'm not Hemingway, I'm not this person, I'm not that. They can't do it because they can't get over the first step because there's like 10 steps.
Yeah. And so, like, what would you say the most powerful verse in the Bible is? I would say, don't know the actual chapter and verse, but it's an independent verse chapter. It's Jesus wept. Not bad.
Yeah. This
Two
what gets
words.
to the point. Well, yeah,
Jesus
what makes you
wept.
feel
Yeah.
like their compassion. It's like that right there. It's kind of like this idea, like when you're a writer and somebody says, well, if you come up with a proposition like baby shoes never worn, right? That makes
Oh,
you
yeah.
think. It
It's a
makes you
great
think,
Hemingway
right?
line. Yeah,
And
agreed.
then you can
Agreed.
go, then you can imagine what it could be. And
Yeah.
that it kind of draws you, because so the keeping it simple, so I Wordsworth versus like Blake. I love William Blake. because
Yeah.
out of all the Victorians, he can, in the songs of innocence and experience, he gets to the point, not like Tennyson and Wordsworth and all those, not that they're not great. I love all those Victorian poets, but Blake could get to the point with, not being verbose. He could get to it with language from that period, but it wasn't as drawn out.
I was talking to a hockey player, and I've talked to many, 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 because that was the world I lived in for many years. I was talking to this very wise hockey player, really smart guy, and a very tough guy named Wendell Clark. He played for the Leafs for many years, Maple Leafs, and that's who I covered for a long time. And we were talking about a real social climber of a player that he knew. And he said, this guy has no new friends. Sorry, this guy has no old friends, only new ones.
Wow.
What a perfect way to describe someone who's always looking for someone more important in the room when they're talking to you. What a perfect way of saying it. He's got, same player, very, very kind of matter of fact and kind of handy guy. And so I was at his, he built a little hockey rink, and it was a 3-on-3 hockey rink. And I said, Wendell, where did you get the refrigeration? Who did the refrigeration for you? He said, well, I did. And I said, Wendell, that's really amazing. I didn't know you knew anything about refrigeration. And he said, Mike, water freezes at 33 degrees. Anyone who tells you it doesn't is lying to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
They figured it out to simplify it. They'll make it.
So those are powerful, powerful things. I wrote a book called Show and Tell Writing. And I think a lot of what we do goes back to the cave. And so we believe something that we observe far more powerfully than we believe something we are told. So we're built to be able to take knowledge and synthesize it and compress it. But when we observe it and make a decision from ourselves, it goes from an observation, right, to an idea, to a truth. And if we're told something, it doesn't necessarily follow that pattern. But when we observe it, because we're trained to survive on what we see. So let me give you an example. I'm in the all those instructions and synthesize them and be able to repeat them. But when you come back into the cave, I have to know by your posture, by your backstory, by the look on your face, by the temperature I'm feeling, I have to know what you're going to do with that spear. So that's the second part of how we get story. The first part is you telling, you take synthesizing all that information, but the real stuff that I believe, not what I'm told, even if you'd be holding this and say to me, I'm not going to hurt you, right? You can tell me that, but you've got a spear in your hand and you've got a bone to pick. And so I believe more than what I see than what you say.
Yeah, actually, speak louder than words.
Combination of telling people stuff, and then the other combination of observing by yourself, seeing based on all these qualities. That's why those two things, when they go together, are so powerful. And that's what storytelling is about.
Yeah, the storytelling it's so integral to like a lot of what we do as podcasters.
Yeah,
because in the podcast form that we're in now, I choose to go live and do kind of like live, not scripted type of interviews, where there's a lot of drive today with people will tell you, well, you got to make it like 15 minutes. You got to script it. You got to throw special effects. You got to go edit, pull all the ums out, do all this production. And I like, like in terms of like the way I do music, I don't do music like that either. I write music, stream of consciousness, in the moment, multi-track, maybe fourth or fifth take, not the 99th take. I want to get closer to what my original concept was. And so it's a choice. And I understand what people want to kind of make things glossy and look shiny and feel perfect. But I think you lose a lot when you do that.
Yeah, I agree.
So one of the things I was wondering in terms of when you want to go write a business book, there's a lot of things that come into play in terms of like cost, how long does it take?
Yeah.
So if you're not very comfortable doing it, I would assume you have to get somebody to help you, and then that's where the cost starts to come in.
No, that's very true.
versus
So
trying to do it all by yourself.
everything we do starts with me interviewing you and and us kind of digging down and really finding what your story is. And so if you decide, look, I want to write the book, Mike, I just need to know where to start and what my story is and what I should always come back to, what my social media should be about. I'll talk to you. I don't know how many times I'll talk to you. You might get really sick of me, but at the end of it, whether it be sometimes it's over in 20 minutes, sometimes it takes 2 hours.
Mhm.
But at the end of those probably 2 hours, we're going to have a really good idea what your story is. Now, it doesn't mean it won't evolve, change, and I always talk about not having a predetermined idea of what your book is about. But this will give you a really great starting point and a North Star. We do that with all their books. Every book we do, I interview you. And there are people who are so sick of me, Phantom, because I come back, I come back, and I come back. And I'll give you an example. We had a great book, a guy named Ron Foxcroft. If you go to any NBA game, NFL game, NHL game, you hear that piercing whistle. He invented that. He's a Canadian guy. I've known him for many years. Great story. He created this trucking business. He bought it from a guy named Bobby Fluke, and he used the slogan, "If it's on time, it's a fluke." Right? So super smart, funny guy. And we wrote this book, and it's really full of interesting tales. And it's 40 rules, 40 ways of the fox. And we were sitting towards the end of it, and I said to him, "You don't drink, do you?" And he said, "No." And then I said, "Well, who was the alcoholic in your life?" Because there's only two reasons why people don't drink. They either hate the taste of it or they hate what it did to their life.
Mhm.
And he said, "It was my dad, and he beat me once a week, every week for 7 years, regular." And we talked about his dad, and he said, "My dad was the king of woulda, coulda, shoulda."
Oh,
Right?
yeah.
He was a man that left nothing accomplished. He just always blamed something else. So my friend Ron said, I decided I was never going to be that guy. Never going to say woulda, coulda, shoulda. And I wasn't going to drink. And if you were writing your book, Phantom, you probably wouldn't put that in because it's awkward to say my dad beat me and he was an alcoholic when I was a boy. If left to our own devices, we won't include that because it's too hard. I wouldn't either. So that's why it's important for someone like me to be asking you questions. I'm going to make you a little uncomfortable, you
I
know?
think, yeah, well, I think you'd be surprised because one thing about being a songwriter is vulnerability is the core,
Oh, it's at the core of it. You're so
right?
right.
So a lot of what we do as like creative artists, musicians, is we're all about vulnerability.
There's
We're
so
all about
many,
about putting that to the front.
and that's what makes songwriting such a unique element. But if you're in the insurance business, that vulnerability is something that you're not going to put to the front, right?
Yeah, yeah. Your
But the
business
fact
person
is,
may not want to do that. Yeah.
if you're writing a book about, say, and you know something that nobody else does, then you can use that vulnerability powerfully. So, can I give you an example?
Hmm.
Sure. I was just speaking with a woman. Her name, oh, she's just a fantastic person. Her name is Cherie, and she lives in Mississippi. She's a woman of color. Cherie is a fantastic person. She works in estates, right? And we got to be talking about why she works in estates. And this is the power of a backstory, and this is the power of vulnerability. So Cherie said that she works because she loves working in the States. And I said, how often has it come in your life that you've seen people absolutely obsessed with not paying inheritance tax? They'll make some people the executors that shouldn't be the executors. They'll move money here, they'll move money there, they'll do it on the slide and say someone, this is your property, but when I die, it's really not your property, it's somebody else. All manner of shit. Greatest way to destroy your family. How often have you seen this? She says, I've seen it countless times. And I
Yeah.
said, now what do you think? And this is Cherie was in the business. What do you think is the rate of U.S. estates that pay inheritance tax per 100? Phantom, I'm going to ask you that question. Out of 100 deaths in the United States, what percent pay inheritance tax?
I wouldn't. I mean, if it's rich people, I would think it would be very low rate. If it's regular people that happen to have it, I think they wouldn't know how to plan it.
Give me a
So
number, dude. Give me a number.
I don't know, 80%.
0.08.
Oh, wow.
no one pays inheritance tax in the United States. Maybe they should, but no one does, right?
Wow.
So most people are destroying their families for a tax that they're never going to have to pay,
Wow.
right? That's a really powerful truth, a really powerful proposition. You would hang your business on that one fact if you were in this business, right? Most people who do this, you're never going to have to pay it. So stop screwing around. Let's do this right, because if not, you'll destroy your family. How does Cherie know that other than observing it? Well, Cherie knows it because Cherie saw it in her own family. Her grandmother was this wonderful woman. She had, they'd have revival, which is news to me, revival. And people would go by her road, her country road. They would stop and her mom would cook them meals, dinners, because they were going to revival. She was someone who helped out everyone. She was hardworking. She worked in the high school where Cherie went to school. I should say Cherie's last name is Prince, Cherie Prince. And so, but when Cherie's mother died at 33, she got a share of the inheritance. And when her grandparents died, everything went to hell, right? All these people who were in her family started fighting. Now they don't talk to each other. It's just crazy what this state has done. So Cherie's family is wrecked. Okay. Now here's where vulnerability comes into the question. Cherie's great grandfather, I believe I've got that right. I might have given one or two extra grandfathers and one or two not, was one of 42 children, right? Because he was a slave. Okay. And so that family survived generation after generation. They survived slavery. They survived Jim Crow. They survived integration. They survived Mississippi. They could not survive a will not being done. That destroyed their family. Where slavery could not, an undone will could. That vulnerability, saying, that my great grandfather was one of 42 children, that willingness to tell that tale, that is so powerful. So if you look at Cherie, she has the most dynamic story. My grandmother was a wonderful woman. When people would go to revival, they'd stop at our house. She was fantastic. But when she died, my entire family was destroyed. And my family had survived slavery, Jim Crow, Mississippi, integration, busting. You name it. My family had survived it. My family could not survive a will, people dying with no will. Now, let me ask you this question. Would you be interested in dealing with someone like this?
Yeah, I mean, her story was very dynamic. I mean, she was telling the truth, and I think that the vulnerability is what I kind of go after.
Yeah.
In terms of the story, because when I pick people to talk to on, as a podcaster, I don't want to hear the kind of like preset normal response. If you want to hear something that's actually going to draw you in, and honesty draws you in. If I pick people to work with, I don't want to have somebody that just wants to clone things. I want somebody that's going to show me something. Well, my statement is, show me the song you're scared to show anybody. Don't show me that you can play anybody else. I want us to hear the vulnerability of your, you potentially are putting your everything on the line. You know what I mean?
So if you're the only person willing to tell this story in your sector, right? And Cherie's sector is it's estates, it's that sort of thing. If you're the only person willing to tell your story, then yours is the only story that counts, because everybody else didn't think enough of their story to write their story down, or to write a book, or to use it for their social media. So if you're that one person willing to tell that story, man, the world is your oyster. Speaking gigs, media appearances, mainstream legacy media appearances. You know what your blogs are about. You have this fantastic story. My family survived slavery, but they could not survive an undone will. It's one sentence. It's just so powerful.
It's very powerful. I mean, but you have to be willing to put yourself out there. And so that's the thing.
That's the key. So Cherie is really a fantastic, open, wonderful person. 5 minutes with Cherie, and you just love her. So she is very courageous, though. She's willing to put it out. And that's the difference. So when I tell people they want to work with me, I tell them, look, you're going to have to be willing to be vulnerable. And there are going to be times where you don't like me very much. right? Because I'm going to ask that question. It's for the best, and you'll be glad you did it, and it'll make your book much better. But we're going to talk about some stuff that you're not comfortable with. Why'd your marriage end? Who the hell wants to answer why their marriage ended? What business is it of yours to ask me why your marriage ended? Well, maybe your marriage ended because I'm just making this up. Maybe your son had a disability and your partner couldn't cope with it and they left, which is not a story that's absolutely homemade. Lots of people have that story. Okay, now we're talking something. So what is this book about? Could it be about the effect of your son's disability on your family? It relates to your marriage, it relates to your siblings, in relation to your social services. This is something that's really important, and it came from a question potentially that you never wanted to answer.
It seems like you put a lot of your journalistic capabilities into this new effort to help people with their business, because when you're like, if you're doing that interview when you're writing, as a journalist, right, it seems like you're using those techniques
I
of
am.
trying to get to the true story, where
I
a lot of
am.
people might be looking for, well, what's going to give me a million views on Instagram, or what's going to give me and in part of the world is marketing, but you're getting to the thing that's going to make you have that unique characteristic that will be that marketing plan.
Yeah, that's it. That's the one story that you should always tell. One story you should always frame. Yeah, journalism's great that way.
That's
Journal, it's tough. It's a lousy place to be right now, but it's a great place to be from. The other thing, I tell you why I do this. I love that moment of connection with the person where you help them see something about their lives they had never really grasped before. Because when you write a book, I tell people, you know what? The book is the second best thing I'm going to give you. The second best thing. I tell them, I tell you what I'll do. I will charge you whatever dollar amount it is for the knowledge and the clarity you have in your life after this, and I'll throw in the book for free. Because often it's the clarity that you get from thinking about your life and talking to people and sitting down and determining, hey, was that person really cruel to me, or were they trying to teach me a lesson? And if I had to tell one person at a party what my business was about, what would I tell them? And who were the people that really influenced me? Maybe just someone I just met once. Maybe they really influenced me because. So the process of putting that all together is so powerful. And that's something you can use for the rest of your life. And we'll throw the book in for free.
It's really interesting that you're pointing out that, like, the way you go at it is to pull those nuggets of like really authenticity and
Yeah.
vulnerability, whereas some people, they might be so in their head about their actual running of their business, and
Yeah.
they're thinking it's like A to Z, the steps I take in my business, right?
That,
Or and
and
and maybe not understanding that maybe that's what you think it should be, but
right.
from what you're telling us is like that's probably not the way it should be.
No, but those things are great for the recommendations. After when you've told your story and when you've sort of differentiated yourself with the power of your story, those things are great. Like if you know a hack or a tip or something like that, that's great, but that's not your story. And the other mistake people make is they think their story is what draws people. Nobody cares about your story. Phantom, nobody cares about your story. Your mother may care. My mother she lived to 100. She was the best. She did care about my story. She'd be about the only person in the world. Nobody cares. No one will walk across the street for your story, but they will travel miles for your conclusions.
Mhm.
Miles. Conclusions. I'm not in the story business. I'm in the conclusion business because conclusions are the most powerful things. Everyone's got a story, and we both know it. Not a lot of people have conclusions.
Yeah, because all the steps of your story, like it could be some Forrest Gump level story, but like, what's the lesson? What's the lesson you
Right.
learned?
Right.
What's the hack? What's the advice? Everybody today is so stressed out about, they want to know what are the top 10 hacks? What are the
Yeah.
top 5 things I can do? How
I
can
get it.
so if
Yeah.
you don't get them to that, and it's just one event after another strung along, say, well, I don't know what the point of that is. Yeah, I'm looking for an answer.
And the guy, if you know the background of the person doing the hack, if they're new and they could just be throwing it out. If they've done the miles, then they have more credibility. If they have that one overriding great proposition, then they have a ton of credibility. And the power of your story is the ability of your listener to believe it.
Yeah.
That's the gig.
Yeah.
And,
Because you wonder.
that's really powerful when you do it. The thing of, so people say to me, what's your audience for your book? And lots of people, they write their book based on what they think their audience wants to hear. No, man, tell your greatest story. And if you sell insurance, they'll find you. If you're a car mechanic, they'll find you. If you're a politician or whatever, they'll find you. Tell your superb story and they will find you. Don't worry about tailoring it for insurance consumers. Because really, you're not selling to insurance buyers. You're selling to human beings.
Well, you want it to be beyond that. It's the law of attraction, right? So if you have this idea, right, and you just think you want to stay in a narrow lane,
Yeah.
right, you're just going to be in that lane and you're not going to go beyond it. So
Oh, absolutely.
how are you gonna have, like, I believe in this thing called like expansive concepts.
Yeah.
Expansive concepts, like, and we live in a world where people want you to stay in the lane. They want you to be in the canon. So if you're in this particular canon, you're in this lane, you should stay in there. You get to be the best person in that lane. But
Right.
like, I'd rather mix things up, right? I'd rather take a little fusion jazz with a punk aesthetic, right? With a little blues tint. Like, well, that's going to be different than all three of those. It's going to be a combination. It's like what I'm feeling. It's what I feel, and I'm feeling. If I put that out there and throw it at the wall of the world, there are going to be people who dig it, and the people that don't. But the people who dig it because it exists, they'll find out about it and they'll get drawn to it. So if you put that nugget, like you're saying, of that authenticity of the self, of that vulnerability, then people are gonna feel it and they're gonna move toward it.
Those things are immune to genres, they just don't. If you have somebody who's great, the genre doesn't matter. I mean, Tony Bennett listened to all sorts of music, and who I adored. I saw him a couple of times, and he said, good is good.
Yeah, good's good.
It's not a matter of good in the genre. It's just good.
Yeah,
it's either good or it's not.
If you look at you cross genre, cross style, right? Like, the only way you get better is if you take everything as a human being. It's like, what I feel is like the muse is the way you synthesize. If you're a creative person and you're open to that muse idea, you're able to synthesize stuff in your subconscious, stuff you just heard today, stuff it's that you read or watched, or what the 10,000 hours of doing whatever you did that make you good at what you do. And if you trust yourself as a creative, it just synthesizes. But if you don't trust yourself, you keep on starting and stopping and never finishing it. But when you trust yourself, you actually go to completion. You actually take that thought and actually go and do it, rather than saying, well, maybe I could do it, should have done it, wish I did it. You do it.
And so our range of services goes from people who just want to learn their story to people who want to write the book. And we have a fantastic coach. And then there's people that just they look at it and they say, I don't have this kind of time, because it takes people often 600, 800 hours. So if I do your book, and our books are about 15,000 to 2,000 words, about 120 pages. I need about 6 hours from you to interview you. And then you'll need about a couple other hours to review the manuscript. So give me 3 months, give me 8 hours, and I'll come back with a really great book.
Wow.
That's a proposition that's really kind of hard to beat. And that's what we do. So we have the absolute people that are in the podcast just want to know what their message is. They want people to help us along with the book, and we coach them, and we don't touch the keyboard, but we help them develop the book. And then there's people who we really, really create the book for. It's not ghostwriting, really, because a ghostwriter just talks to you once, it kind of goes away. We don't do that. We hound you, man.
you continue the interview.
And then we come back like 6 hours later. So in 3 weeks and 8 hours, you've got a book. So there's a whole different range of services there. But the important thing is, every one of them starts by defining what those 3 things are: the proposition, the backstory, and the advice. Everything we do is based on those 3 things.
And you're giving people no reason to be a procrastination, to be a procrastinator. Because like if you're gonna offer the ability, like if you stick with this, if you allow me to interview, if you allow me to go through this process that you've developed, then you're gonna have a win. And
Yeah,
so why would you want to lose?
absolutely. And writing is hard for people. I get it. People have the idea that writers like to write. I hate it. I hate it. Dorothy Parker had the best line about writing. She said, I despise writing. I love having written. Right?
The
And
process.
she's dead right. So people find it so hard because there's 50 words, but only one right word.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
so many ways to idea. There's the flow of the page. There's
Style.
a mistaking it's for the possessive instead of it is, or there for there, or getting a name wrong, or a fact wrong. There's so many ways you can go wrong. It's like dancing through a minefield. And so because of that, and because once you get better, this is really the bane of it. Once you get better, you don't want to give people the cheap shit you gave them before, right? you get 1% better. So you want your stuff to be 10% better. So, and then you have to edit it and have it. And that's hard too, because your editor is like a frenemy. You love them, but you hate them, right? Because they're telling you stuff you don't want to know or learn. And so it's really, really hard. So I have tons and tons of empathy for people who start and then stall out, which is the way it always goes. So, but we want our clients to be successful. So with help and with encouragement and with the ability for our guy to help you shape your story, we can do this. And if you don't, at the end of the day, you think, my time is better spent having this great, great, great book and having somebody write it and help me with it and just help give me that clarity about my life. Well, we can do that as well.
I think what you've described is like I said, it's a win-win because you're putting together a proposition where you're having somebody helping them walk through it, and then also helping them say, well, I can't really do it, so I'm gonna give over the reins to a certain extent. But I just think that it's a good place to be where people want to tell their story, but maybe
Yeah.
they don't know how. And
Yeah.
you've given
Where
them
to start.
different levels of, like, how much they wanna get involved in terms of, doing it their own work,
And
you're that's a great proposition, I believe.
oh, thank you for saying that. There's one other thing that really I wanted to mention. So many people have been told that their story isn't important
Mm,
and that their experiences aren't important or they have no use or utility for other people. There is not a human being on earth who can't help somebody else with their story. It's just a matter of figuring it out. What I find odious, maybe even obscene, is the idea that someone got in their ear and told this person that their story had no value. That's someone they trusted and believed gave them the impression that they didn't matter, their story didn't matter. Those people, and they're often teachers and parents and coaches, those people should be consigned to the seventh circle of hell
yeah.
because what we carry around those lies our entire life.
Yeah, we you
Like,
this imposter syndrome gets built in from
oh,
the
I
the kind of law of attraction. If you get around people that are downers, then,
yeah,
like I'm a Buddhist, I'm a believe in, like, negative energy, right? So if you're around
yeah.
the people who have this negative energy and they're down on themselves and they're down on you, then you don't see a way out. But if you start to believe, and it's hard because you get to that crucible moment where, you're probably running into people that got to that crucible moment and they know, "I do matter. I do have something to say, but I don't know how to do it, but I really I'm dedicated to figure out how." So you're the kind of person they want to run into, and because they'll get the encouragement of, yeah, now I finally am getting on the right foot, and I'm making that progress.
I work for the right to meet those people. That's what I do because I'm 64. So when you're 64, no one's going to hire you, right? And so I have to work for the right to work, but I work for the right to meet those people. to help those people. That's why I get up in the morning, and that's why I do what I do. I do all the other stuff. I do podcasting myself, and I do social media, and that's nice. That's fine. It's fun. But I write just, if I could have my life perfectly, all I would do is help those people find their stories, because that's really what I love to do.
I think that we can kind of end it there because I know you're pressed for time a little bit, but I think that your story about helping people is a great story, and this kind of story we like to tell on this podcast. We want to remind people to go to www.mikeulmer.com to connect with you, and that's where they can like book an appointment, begin the process. Is that how they reach you?
Yeah. And of course, the call is always welcome. People have tons and tons of questions about it, and I'll answer any question they have. My website has, oh my God, 4,000 words of questions. So if you go to the website, just go to frequently asked questions, and it'll answer all your questions. What I really want to stress, if I can, I know we talked about 45 minutes, but if we can just go another couple minutes, that'd be great. What I really want to stress is there are no gatekeepers anymore. People should know that their book is not going to be in the airport. Probably 98% of the books aren't going to be in the airport. They're not going to be picked up by big mainstream people, big mainstream companies, because those companies don't exist and their lists are super, super short. The thing is, with Amazon, you don't have to pay a dime to get your book printed. And it's the biggest bookstore in the world. And you may not like Amazon. There's other services as well. But if you just have a completed manuscript, print ready to go, you're there, because all you have to do is install that on Amazon. And if you're working with a traditional publisher, they decide how many books are printed. They decide the price of the book. They decide the vibe of the book. They decide the cover. When today you have more control, more choices than ever, it's really a great time to produce a book, which of course is so essential for your social media, for everything to tie into. It's really who you are. But don't be discouraged because HarperCollins isn't going to buy your book. It's better this way.
Yeah, you could think about it, with musicians, we are in the same kind of boat where we don't have gatekeepers, and then we have like all these streaming services that'll put our stuff out.
Yeah.
But the core to winning in this type of thing is like, okay, if you go out and tour, you have a merch desk and you sell your vinyl at the merch desk, you sell your posters, you sell your t-shirts, but you can at a micro level actually do better with your royalty rates and how much money you make, because you own your masters, you own your content. And so when you get into this independent kind of mindset, you can actually make money, but it might not be what you thought. You're not making like massive amounts of money, but you could do things that you probably didn't expect and be on that creative type of mind.
Stories about a musician getting screwed by the advance. When you get an advance, everyone says, I got an advance. It's your money. It's not their money.
Yeah.
It's your money.
Yeah.
It's just a tech question of timing, And so it's just so much better today because you have that option. But you're right. You have to be willing to embrace it. The great thing about working for a record company or writing a book picked up by a mainstream publisher is that they decide everything, right? The great thing about not doing that is that you decide everything, and you create something that's custom to your business. And then the great thing about you can make it a leave behind, or you can, if you want to, want to be a speaker, you can send that to the booking agency. The funny thing is, though, Phantom, the best thing about writing a book is having written it. Like 90% of the power of the book is its existence.
Yeah.
99% of people who see that and are impressed by that will not read the book. But the fact that you are confident enough to have a message and to create the book is the actual seal of approval. It's the power of the action. So you don't have to write the world's greatest book. You just have to write a truthful book for yourself. And you have to write a book with the spirit of helping the person who's buying it. Because, and this I think is really important, the person who's reading your book stopped everything they were doing, and the person's Phantom to listen to your song, but not so much to listen to a song because you can do something else. The person who's reading your book stopped everything.
Yeah.
Stopped thinking about everything in the world. Put down everything, the kids, the car, the social media, everything, to read your book, to read what you thought.
That's powerful.
Treat that person
Yeah,
with
it's very powerful.
unparalleled respect and thankfulness. And if you do, if you write a book with them in mind, if you use musicality in your sentences, if you kind of juggle the show and the tell, if you have great sidebars and ideas, if you're funny and fun, if you inject that sort of lightness into the book and yet still deliver a powerful truth, they will follow you to the gates of hell.
Yeah, it's that poetry of having that kind of synergy. If you've got something that draws you in, you don't have to be a fantasy author to draw people in. Like if you can draw people with your cadence and your poetic nature, like it's like a great speaker, and when they read your book, that they're feeling it, like the way you're speaking it out loud. It's that the moment that we're looking for as art, as creators. We're looking for people to get drawn in enough that they're actually going to stay with you for however long to actually be in your world.
You make a great point when you say that, because the best thing that someone can say about your writing is that it sounds like you, right? This sounds like the Phantom said, right? The trick is that we have this and we have this, but between that and the keyboard, we have insecurity. We want to sound smarter than we are. We're a little intimidated by the process. We want to impress somebody. So this and this has to travel this highway. And by the time it gets to the keyboard, it's shit, right? So the trick is to remove the impediments between this and this and this.
Get to the heart, get to the real, the thing that I think what happens with musicians is that we end up destroying our work.
Yeah. Because you want to impress other musicians, right? You want to impress other musicians.
Yeah, that first draft of what we call the first demo sometimes has more heart and more soul and more real, and it's more vulnerable. By the time we get to version 99, we took all the life out of it.
Yeah.
And my core as a producer is I always have people like the earlier version, even if it's imperfect, with its happy accidents, is actually better. And so to get people to agree to the earlier versions, or the versions that might have micro errors in them, is hard today, because people get so into the computers that they can fix everything. They're like, you shouldn't fix that, because that is that's real. But you're making it fake. You're making it like unreal. You're making it unnaturally perfect. And if it's unnaturally perfect, it's like it isn't your voice. It's like somebody else's voice. It's not you.
Steven Tyler is talking about one of the big, I think it was Sweet Emotion, the Aerosmith guy from Aerosmith, and he was saying that he went and there were no maracas. No one brought the maracas. So he took a coffee cap, Tim, or some little piece of plastic, maybe a coffee lid, and he just used it. And it just, if you listen to the song, it's perfect. And it's just of the moment. So I get what you're saying.
Yeah, that moment, in the moment thing, Dylan hitting his buttons on his jacket. And then that version of like Idiot Wind sounds brilliant. And then some people are like, oh, we can't put that one out. And then eventually they got put out. And it just feels so good. And it sounds so dynamic. Like, I don't care that I hear him, his jacket buttons hitting the guitar. It gave it character. It was like, there wasn't anything wrong with it. But sometimes people, they want to be so perfect. It's like, well, they get rid of it. You don't need to get rid of
it. I get. I'm right there with you.
Well, thank you again for being on tonight. I think it's always awesome to talk to people with different perspectives. And we talked to a lot of creative people. And I think a lot of people who've watched this and listened to this, once we put it on the wider world, it'll be on all the podcast platforms that most people can listen to or watch. I hope that they do connect with you, and because a lot of people don't know that first step, and you've really made it easier for people that don't know that, or don't know the first thing about how to get this started. And I think this is a really awesome proposition for a lot of people who maybe didn't know what to do. And I'm glad that you came on the show to give the folks in our audience the chance to hear this. And I want to thank you again for being on the Family Electric Coast podcast.
Listen, it was my pleasure. Thanks. I'm just so pleased that you would see to have me on. No, my pleasure.
Thank you.
You bet.